Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this week's show, Mike Briggs looks at the cattle markets, Kurtis Harms reports on issues in the meat industry, and Bob Wright and Tamara Jackson-Zims make recommendations for scouting the now emerged corn crop. Our marketing analyst this week is Mike Briggs. With regular gasoline prices falling for the 6th straight week, coupled with the onset of grilling season, we asked Mike on Wednesday morning if those two factors would ease the affordability of beef for consumers.
I think you've got two different issues there. I think you've got, now they have more disposable income because it's not costing them so much to fill their gas tank, so it's kind of like getting a raise, and I think that's very beneficial long term. But what I'm finding and hearing little bits and pieces of, I think there's sticker shock when they go to the store and they actually look and see how much beef actually costs. I think there's a little shock, a little sticker shock there, and it backs them up a little bit. I don't think it chases them away, but I think a lot of what's been going on is you've seen, or I think, and the retailers picked up on this because he has such a good margin in hamburger. A lot of consumers don't look, they just grab and go. And then when they actually look, they're like, oh, this stuff's really gotten high compared to the last time I looked. And I think there's a little sticker shock there, but because they have more disposable income, I think that sticker shock won't be so adverse to us.
But you think there is a little bit of maybe ignorance on the consumer's part that they're just not paying attention right now?
Well, I wonder that. You know, I think people go in and I'm gonna have a steak, or I'm buying hamburger, and I just buy hamburger, and they don't really, I wonder if they just don't really look.
There's been a lot of pricing increases in the past 6 months that maybe people have already set their diets, and now they already know what they're getting. And they didn't
catch it, and the retailer moves very gradually. You know, it's not very often, but I do go to the store and buy beef, and it's because I'm going in to get a particular cut. I just grab. I don't pay attention. So I don't know if the rest of the consumers are like that or not, but I kind of think maybe they are.
We'll see cattle and feed numbers coming out on Friday, so by the time the show airs, we'll see those numbers. What do you expect to see in them?
Well, we talked before. I get really concerned because for months now we keep getting a cattle and feed number that's over 100%, and every month there's declining placements. Well, at some point we can't have over 100% cattle on feed if we have declining placements, and I wonder when that's going to be. When that point happens, that's going to be really interesting, because I still say there's going to come a point where we get really short on fat cattle. Now, how high does the economy actually, or the consumer, let us drive this beef? I don't know. I think export's going to be a big driver of that, but I think it's going to get pretty tight at some point, and it's got to happen one of these days. You can't continue to have declining placements and have above average numbers on feed.
USDA said this morning that they expect exports to be down 6% year over year from last year. You agree with that? Or you're worried of the same, perhaps?
I'm concerned of that a little bit, because primarily the strength in the dollar and some of the shines come off of some of the other economies, so maybe they don't have quite the income they need to buy it, especially with the dollar. That, you know, that's been a policy of our government for quite a few years now, and it's worked, of having a cheap dollar. Well, with all the things going on in Europe, all of a sudden the dollar looks pretty stout.
USDA also says that corn is going to yield 166 bushels per acre. How do you feel about that? Is that a smile?
You know, that would be really fun from a standpoint of an ending price and how we could do things with it. I just would really like to get to the point where we're not struggling for corn, because I think between now and actual harvest, bushels are going to get tight, bushels are going to get expensive, and it's really going to be a struggle.
So you do think that corn prices may continue to increase?
I don't see how near term they can't. I think it's two totally different crops. You can't view them the same. New crop, old crops, old crop. Old crop supplies are tight, and they will remain so.
Talk to me about quickly the difference in the margins here. Packers margins are improving, but feeders are still taking it.
Cattle feeder margins are horrible. I had 1,100 cattle run by me the other day. Every single one of them loses over $100 a head. I don't know who's doing that. I don't know why you're doing it. I don't think there's that much up in this market. If there is, yay for everybody. The Packers in a lot better shape, and I don't know if he was ever in as bad a shape as they led us to believe, and I think they're in a little bit better shape than they are leading us to believe because the kills have gotten up, which is a good thing because we need to kind of keep these cattle churning because of the really nice weather we've had all year. Even though our slaughter numbers are down, our production is not down because the cattle are so much larger.
Next week, University of Missouri Extension ag economist Ron Plain joins us to look at hog markets. In other marketing news, the CME Group has withdrawn its request to expand grain trading to 22 hours a day. Instead, CME will request an expansion to 21-hour sessions, leaving trade closed for 3 hours each day. Some opponents worried about staffing during the sessions. Senator Chuck Grassley told Reuters before the change that the government should only release crop reports when the market was closed in order to prevent volatility. The USDA said this week it'll begin collecting Nebraska crop information at the beginning of June. The USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service will survey thousands of farmers in the state to measure the number of acres planted and to which crop. The survey takes a random sampling and is used for the June 29th acreage report. In its prospective plantings report, the USDA estimated U.S. farmers would plant 73.9 million soybean acres and 95.9 million corn acres. Maybe more now than ever before, there's an increased interest in understanding what's in our food. Some reports in the media recently identified one ingredient in meat products that has been around for decades but is now provoking questions. Market Journal's Kurtis Harms has more.
On the heels of the lean, finely textured beef or pink slime controversy, another food processing term is sticking in the media. Meat glue, more appropriately known as transglutaminase, is raising questions after a series of news reports were released this month. Transglutaminase isn't a new practice and is just one method of cold bonding, according to Assistant Professor of Animal Science with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Gary Sullivan.
Cold bonding, there's two different technologies that they use. One is beef fibrin, and the other one is transglutaminase. Both are enzymes that are used, and what they do is they bind the pieces of meat together in a cold environment.
The cold bonding process is relatively simple. In this example, which will be a pork tenderloin wrapped in bacon, the transglutaminase enzyme begins in a powdered form. Once mixed with water, the solution is applied to the meat cuts. The enzyme works to bind proteins that occur naturally in the meat. The entire product typically needs to remain cold for several hours for the process to work. Cold bonding allows food processors and chefs to be creative in developing new food products. The process also can result in more uniform fillets.
If you look at a tenderloin, you actually have a large end and then it tapers down to a small end. By binding two together, you can actually get a uniform cut across, so you can have a uniform thickness and weight from the tenderloin.
In our example of the pork tenderloin fillets wrapped in bacon, the cold bonding process eliminates the need for wooden toothpicks or skewers to hold the bacon to the tenderloin. Critics of cold bonding are concerned food service providers or restaurants will combine lower quality cuts of meat, bind and form them, and sell them as higher-end steaks and fillets. University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension meat specialist Dennis Burson doesn't believe this is or will be a common practice.
The only way that would happen if somebody decided to take a very low value cut and try to make a higher value cut out of it, such as taking round meat and trying to make a strip steak out of it. The challenge with that is no matter what you do with the round meat, it's going to eat and texture much like round meat. Eventually, if you're selling that to a restaurant, they're going to discover that their customers are complaining about the quality of their product. And so there's going to be economic feedback within the system to help curb some of that.
All meat products sold must also be labeled correctly to meet FDA regulations.
If you call something a loin strip, the muscle has to come from the loin strip and not from someplace else.
Labels on meat cuts will identify if meat products have been bonded together. Restaurants using enzymes to bind cuts of meat will also be able to provide this information to customers.
On a label that a person could look at in a restaurant, it would have the name of the product on it, but then it would also have to say that it's been formed with or bonded with. And in this case, it could be bonded with an enzyme, or it could be bonded with fibrin, or they could even get more specific and name the two compounds, the transglutaminase or the fibrinogen and the thrombin, as the two areas that it would be bound with.
The binding agents, transglutaminase and fibrin, are both approved by the FDA and are considered safe. However, when meats are bonded together, more care needs to be taken in the cooking process, according to Associate Professor of Food Science with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Harshavardhan Tippereddy. Dr. Tippereddy says there are intact pieces of meat, such as steaks, and non-intact meat products, such as ground beef.
And your bacteria are on the surface of the round or the intact muscle. So when you make a steak out of it, the bacteria are still on the surface of the steak. So when you cook a steak, the surface of that steak is heated to a lot higher temperature than the interior of the steak. As long as we don't have any bacteria inside the steak, even if you cook to rare temperatures, the steak is safe because you destroy the organisms that are on the surface and the interior, the bacteria are not there, so even a rare product would be safe.
In ground beef and bonded meat products, more surface area is exposed, which increases the amount of bacteria throughout the meat. This bacteria can be destroyed as long as proper cooking times and temperatures are reached.
You can cook to rare temperatures, but enough time should be there. So it's a combination of time and temperature. So if you have a lower temperature, you need to keep it for a longer period of time. And if you're at higher temperature, 160 or 165 degrees Fahrenheit, you can instantaneously finish the product and then serve it.
Food bonding technologies are not new practices. Many processed meats, dairy, and pasta products use similar binding processes. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Kurtis Harms.
Thanks, Kurtis. Transglutaminase and fibrin are both natural binding agents derived from plants and animals. In other food news, Domino's Pizza recently rejected a proposal from the HSUS that would have required it to study ending the use of pork from suppliers using gestation crates. 80% of Domino's shareholders voted against the resolution. Now some in the agricultural community are showing their support. An online Facebook group is deeming this weekend an Ag Pizza Party, encouraging supporters to buy a pizza from Domino's to show their appreciation. A study from Iowa State University and the University of Wisconsin gave positive news to the ethanol industry this week. Researchers found that in 2011, ethanol use reduced wholesale gasoline prices by $1.09 per gallon. The highest margins were found here in the Midwest, where the effect increased to $1.69 per gallon. Researchers found 2011 numbers to be higher due to increasing ethanol production and higher crude oil prices. As we've covered in past shows, mild winter temperatures have sped the growth of wheat and other plants. But the conditions have also allowed insects to emerge sooner than normal. We talked with UNL Extension entomologist Bob Wright this week about the beginning of rootworm egg hatch and common stalk borer, a pest producers should now be on the lookout for.
It's a type of caterpillar, and it has a sort of unusual life cycle. The adults lay their eggs in the fall, typically on field borders, brome grass areas, or dead vegetation within the field. The eggs hatch out in the spring, and they start feeding out on brome grass, and then when the caterpillar gets about half grown, the plant is too small for it to complete its development, and so it starts moving out of that plant, and that's when it moves into corn and other crops. And we can predict that based on degree days. And what we're seeing now in southeast Nebraska is this is the time where people should be out checking field borders, see if they can see injury from stalk borers, and make a treatment decision pretty soon.
As they move into that field, how can you notice the injury? What should you be looking for?
Okay, typically they either bore into the stalk or bore in through the whorl, and so they can kill the growth in the whorl. You get dead terminal growth. That's the first sign typically of severe damage from stalk borer.
You mentioned the degree days. Explain to me how that works and where we are currently, or where we're the range we're in.
Well, we use degree days because that adjusts for the fact that with a year like today, this year, we can account for things rather than using calendar dates. So if we have a warm year, it predicts faster insect development. Right now, we're at about 1,400 to 1,500 degree days in southeast Nebraska, and that's the time when you would want to start making a decision to treat. In other parts of the state, we're lower, and we're at the range about 1,300 degree days from January 1, where you should start scouting. So most of the state should either be scouting or getting ready to make a treatment decision for stalk borers.
If you've scouted and you think that you do have stalk borers or a necessary damage that you might meet, what is the treatment recommendation then?
Okay, we have threshold information on the Crop Watch website. It varies with the amount of injury and the cost to control and the yield loss or yield potential of the field, so it's not a simple number. But a post-emergence insecticide spray can kill the caterpillars that are moving. They move over a period of time, so you have a chance to kill them still, even though they're starting to move now.
We've been talking about corn. Does it affect soybeans?
It can feed on soybeans, but it's not a major pest. I think one of the issues is the soybean stem is too small for the caterpillars to complete their development. It's pretty rare to see them on soybeans, but occasionally you do see them on soybeans.
Let's move to rootworm egg hatch. How far ahead of schedule is that looking to be this year?
We saw them starting May 7th up at Meade, and about that same week out at Clay Center. And this is at least 2 weeks ahead of normal, almost 3 weeks of what we typically see as average, so it's very much early. The main impact is that all the developmental stages of rootworms are going to start earlier this year, and particularly we may be seeing adult beetles a couple of weeks earlier than normal.
A lot of producers out there probably already think they have the precautions in place by planting a seed variety or anything like that. So what recommendations do you give to them?
Well, even if you've planted a BT corn or a seed treatment, it's good to scout for the larvae. You need to dig up the soil around the plant and look to see if you can find the larvae. Probably not right now, but in a week or two when they get bigger, it's easier to find them. And there are some post-emergence insecticides you can apply if you need to.
Producers can find updated degree days maps and other information on stalk borer and rootworms on the Crop Watch website. Martin Massingale is the director of the Center for Grassland Studies at UNL. He says because of mild winter conditions, grasslands will be more sensitive this spring. Massingale says food reserves may not be as high this year because of a shorter resting period. Producers may therefore need to take another look at grazing plans.
I think one of the things to remember is where you've had this fast growth in the spring and depleting the food reserves, that you don't cut off the tops too early or that you don't cut them too frequently. When you take those tops off, you're taking off most of the photosynthetic surface where the food is manufactured. And when you do that, then for a while, till it gets that leaf surface area back, it has to draw on stored reserves.
Sure.
And if you cut too frequently or graze too frequently, then you're going to further deplete those and you'll weaken the plants. And then you may have trouble in the summer, for that matter, because if the plants can get good footing, if you will, or food reserves and more root growth in the spring, then they're better prepared for the hot, dry weather that you're likely to find in the summer, and they may be more productive too. If they have a good root system that spreads out in the soil, they can pick up more moisture, more nutrients, and they'll just grow and produce more.
Massingale says the eastern part of Nebraska is faring better in moisture than its counterpart, but regardless, a better root system allows plants to get the most moisture out of the soil. Nebraska conservation officials have identified 8 primary resource concerns in the state in order to better allocate future federal cost share dollars. In the May Nebraska Farmer, you can read what those areas are and why they were selected. Craig Derrickson, a state NRCS conservationist, says the goal is to better align NRCS program resources with actual needs and opportunities. You can read more about those concerns in the May Nebraska Farmer. UNL Extension plant pathologist Tamara Jackson-Zim says now is a good time to sample cornfields for nematodes. Tamara says the plant parasites are common in every field, but whether or not you have a problem is determined by which ones you have and how many there are.
Well, they can cause severe damage in some cases depending on which ones you have by causing severe root damage, and that of course can stunt the plants and cause quite a bit of damage and injury.
So if I have a field, how do I know if I have nematodes in it or not? What are the symptoms that I should be seeing in my corn?
In a severe case, you might notice that there are circular patches in the field that are stunted or yellow, or that you may notice are not yielding the way you would expect them to do. And so the only way you're really going to know whether or not you have a problem is to collect a sample and submit it to a lab.
And you recommend that farmers do that now. Why is now the time frame to do it?
Well, in particular, now is a good time to do it, or early in the season while the plants are small, if you have sandy soil. Now you can do it for any of your fields right now and we'll get good data, and especially up to about V6 or around knee-high corn. And that's because the roots are still shallow and the nematodes are still shallow in those fields too.
The time frame then differs depending on what soil you have?
Well, and actually it depends more on the type of nematode. Some of the larger nematodes prefer sandy soil, and so those nematodes are actually the ones that tend to go deeper in the soil and out of reach of our traditional probes, and that's why we recommend sampling sandy fields early in the season, like now up to about V6.
But are they specific to those sandy soils? I mean, can they go other places as well?
They can, some. We have a lot of different species, at least a dozen different ones in the Midwest and in Nebraska, and in fact some of the others are much more common. And so there are nematodes in every field. And another time that you could sample fields that are not sandy would be around harvest or after harvest, when you would collect samples for your traditional soil samples for nitrogen.
Let's go to the sampling process then. What do I need to do?
First of all, we want to make sure that when you collect soil, we want to make sure in addition that you also collect root samples. And that's important because our most important nematodes, some of them also feed on and inside roots. So it's important that the lab that you submit them to is going to extract nematodes not only from the soil but also from root samples.
You're digging in both the soil and then you're also digging up the plant itself.
We are now recommending that you go ahead and submit smaller plants. Now later on in the season it's not going to be necessary, but early in the season up to about V6 we recommend going ahead and selecting 4 to 6 plant samples in addition to the soil cores.
Specifically, how should we go about sampling in the fields, whether it be through the plants or in the soil?
Well, when people collect soil samples in particular using a traditional soil probe, make sure that you sample next to the plants, whether it's now or at the end of the season sampling within the row. We know the nematodes are going to be wherever the roots are, so you should hear the roots breaking as you're sampling. And likewise, when you're digging up plants with a shovel, make sure that you get as much root material as you can, keeping in mind if you have a nematode problem, affected roots might be more brittle and break off more easily.
And what do I do with the sample once I have it?
Once you have it, we want to make sure that you package those in plastic Ziploc type bags and ship those by some rapid method to the laboratory, and preferably earlier in the week.
Specific ways to handle the sample, Tamara?
Well, in particular, keep in mind that we need these nematodes alive because many of them need to crawl out on their own for us during the extraction process. And so it's important that we handle them both gently and keep the temperature at a moderate level like you would your night crawlers if you're going fishing.
Maybe then the most important question, how can producers use this information to make sure or to eliminate this problem in the future?
Well, if they find that they've got a nematode problem, we do have some management options that are available to them now. We have 2 seed treatment nematicides, both Avicta and Votivo, that are available to us now. And being seed treatments, they would need to make that decision in the fall when they order their seed. We also have some in-furrow treatments that are available, like Counter, for spring application at planting.
With continuing concerns over dry conditions of the state, UNL Extension statewide climatologist Al Dutcher is in the studio to provide a recap of the drought conditions here in Nebraska.
Here we are again for another weather forecast. Unfortunately, I'm on vacation, so I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to bring you up to date on how the precipitation trends have been going since this spring and then dating all the way back to last fall, and look at some of the specific drought areas of the country that we're going to pay close attention to as we move through this next 30 to 60 day period. Now, to kind of give you a perspective of if you think it was unusually warm, we're going to use Lincoln data for instance, and we start to look at the number of 90 degrees incurred up through the 9th of May. We've seen 6 this year, and that ties 1989 for the most number of 90 plus days that we've seen this early in the year. Now, if we jump that back to the number of 80 degree days, we're pitching around 17 to 19 days, depending on location here in eastern Nebraska, and that still ranks us number 1 behind 1981, and that was about 2 days earlier than that. Now we go to 70, we're all the way up to 39, and the only year since 1895 that exceeds this year was 1910, and that was a major drought that encompassed much of the southern and central plains. So if we take that and look forward, we have seen an uptick in precipitation, but these above normal temperatures that have run 7 consecutive months here in Nebraska, dating all the way back to last September, which was our last cooler than normal month, and then looking back even farther, 9 of the last 10 months have been above normal, and if that trend continues, of course, we're concerned about the water use issue as we go forward. So every bit of moisture we get now is very important going forward. So let's take a look at the drought monitor and see what it's showing in regards to drought. And as we go to that, the one thing I'll draw your attention to is up here in the northern plains, there has been a significant reduction in the drought areas. I don't know exactly if this is truly what is happening, because we did have some runoff with some of these recent rain events, and I think it's an underestimating here in northeast Nebraska the dryness issues. But at this time of the year, there's not a lot of water demand from newly emerged crops. It's our wheat and our alfalfa that are the big water users. But what we are starting to see is an expansion toward the northwest from the southeast, where it's been extremely dry, and we're starting to see dryness issues returning back to the southern plains, and we're also seeing some pretty extensive dryness all the way up in the central Rockies, where the snowpack now has dropped below 40%, and by all estimates is likely to be completely gone in the southern half of the Rocky Mountains by the time we get to the June. Now let's take a look at the last 30 days. We have seen a significant uptick in precipitation across the northern plains, which was a drier trend has now turned wet, and a lot of this is from the recent thunderstorm activity, but notice we're starting to see some drier patterns starting to emerge across the southern plains and the southeast. And this bears watching to see whether or not this shifts northward as the jet stream itself starts to shift toward Canada. Now as we go to the 90 days, we do see some residual moisture up here in the northern plains, again responsible for most of this recent thunderstorm activity, and we start to see an emerging dry pattern encroaching into the eastern corn belt. So again, we'll need to watch this with keen interest. And if we go back to the water year, we see that it's very wet and across the eastern corn belt, so they do have some deep subsoil moisture. More spotty here across the western plains in Illinois, where it just depends on if you receive some good thunderstorm activity. And for Nebraska, looking from northeast into south central Nebraska, we're still running deficits of 2 to 4 inches. So if the temperatures start to get above normal, we go a couple weeks without precipitation, these deficits are going to increase by an inch a week.
Thanks, Al. The Market Journal mobile app is available in the iTunes and Google Play stores for iPads and smartphones. You can also download the latest Market Journal episode in its entirety from the iTunes store. Next week, Ron Plain joins us to look at hog markets, and we'll look at nitrogen levels in soils across the state. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.